I'm Seth Fein. I'm a historian and a filmmaker. I've taught for a long time at universities. Currently I'm teaching the Fierstein Graduate School of Cinema. My filmmaking developed out of my scholarship and also out of my understanding about how films can do history.
As a kid, I would ride past here with my parents on the Grand Central, and I would always look at the globe and try to see it, in between the trees, and I would always try to find the bottom of it, and I could never really get to the bottom.
My relationship, particularly to Between Neighborhoods principal subject, the Unisphere, the giant globe in Flushing Meadows in Queens, is a complicated one, but the Unisphere offered me an opportunity to look at this object that was created by empire. It represents empires. It represents the power of technology in the 1960s when it was built as the theme center for the New York World's Fair of 1964 and 1965. The power of technology to solve the world's problems. The idea that American know-how, that the space race, the United States would win that, and that its technology could modernize especially the third world, where it was competing not only with the Soviet Union, but also with China, and also particularly with the Cuban Revolution in the 1960s.
Until I became an adult, and I tried to find it, and I Google searched it, came out here, saw the globe, I was amazed. But when I walked towards it, it looked like the face of God to me. It was just amazing.
Having grown up in New York City, and having grown up in the era when the city was dealing and coming to terms with the world that Robert Moses had built, the guy who built the Unisphere, who built that World's Fair, and the fact that I understood that where the Unisphere is, it's the center of his empire. Not only does it represent the U.S. empire, it made me begin to realize I could use it to bring together these two themes, the history of New York City, something I personally was connected to, and what I'd been teaching, the history of U.S. empire in the world, and then also to use materials that I felt comfortable with, archival materials relating to U.S. propaganda, and later on research I did about representation of the World's Fair and the Unisphere in the 60s, and that I knew how to work with these things, and this was an opportunity for me to express histories that I understood, but only could really be expressed audiovisually.
Everywhere construction goes on so rapidly, in fact, that what you see here is already ancient history. It's so close to opening day that tickets are already on sale all over the country.
Robert Moses, when he took control of the New York World's Fair Corporation, was a corporation, a private corporation. The city contracted with it to do the World's Fair. He actually turned to private companies, corporations, to build a lot of it. This was his strategy, and it made him independent in some ways. For example, the Unisphere, the subject of my film, was built by U.S. Steel. In return for that, they basically got naming rights. That World's Fair really began a process that you can still see in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, of the privatization of public space. One of the ways I try to show this transition connection between liberalism and neoliberalism is looking at the U.S. Open in New York City, the tennis tournament. Now, I should tell you, I like tennis. I even like the U.S. Open. I like to go to it, but I don't like what it's done to the park. It basically is a gated community that walls off a lot of the park from people from all over the world who use the park all year in the name of globalization. But a globalization that has to do with something that happens for 2 weeks a year and has to do with people coming to this gated community and spending money there. And then for the rest of the year, the big stadium, which is named after a great person, Arthur Ashe, but on top of its new roof says Chase, which is really the point, is privatized.
The Wilsons take the motor train for an overall view of the fairgrounds. There is the symbol of the fair, the great Unisphere.
This was the liberal era, an era when, not an era of austerity, an era of spending, an era when the government said it could not only develop American cities, it could develop so-called third world countries as well. And often neoliberal era of austerity, of private markets, of actually an ideology that says the state is not important, but in fact uses the state to discipline workers, to take land, to do all sorts of things, but more just in the form of police powers and also in terms of legal changes. But the state actually is very important for neoliberalism, that there's actually a great deal of continuity, in my opinion, that you can see in the history of New York City between liberalism and neoliberalism, and particularly between Robert Moses and Donald Trump. And I say that not only because we're in this moment when people are thinking about Trump, but because I see it very clearly.
We will build new roads and highways and bridges and airports and tunnels and railways all across our wonderful nation.
We have roamed these United States and literally combed the globe for pavilions and exhibits which will reflect the achievements of all men in industry, culture, the arts, and harmless entertainment.
When I was making the transition from being a historian who writes to a historian who films, I had been working on a project about the U.S. government's use of television in Latin America as propaganda in the 1960s to fight Castro.
Spanish, number 94, take one.
Muy buenas, les habla John Gress para presentarles a las personas y los hechos, grandes y
There are all
pequeños.
sorts of genres of programs, telenovelas, news programs, forms of educational TV, dramatic series, as well as serials. And these were all designed to explain some of the things Unisphere expresses, the promise of liberalism, to bring development to the third world, an alternative to socialist revolution. And I had discovered the kinescopes, the films of the television programs in the archives, and then I had declassified the documents about how they were made, and I did some publishing about that, and also about how they were distributed and exhibited on Latin American TV. Some programs were made in the United States without attribution. Others were made with attribution in Venezuela and in Mexico and in Brazil. And they went everywhere in Latin America except for Cuba. It's called Our Neighborhood, and the title of the film comes from the title of a telenovela made in Mexico called Nuestro Barrio, which means Our Neighborhood. And it's a very appropriate title also in translation for the entire film, since the United States has often looked at Latin America as its neighborhood.
Jack Kennedy was magic in Latin America. He was a superstar. Anything about Kennedy was going to be popular, very usable overseas. After the Bay of Pigs, they were mortal enemies. There's no question about that Castro's revolution in Cuba had a profound effect on our programming.
Y la Alianza para el Progreso demostrará que la miseria y la desesperación no han de ser forzosamente el destino del hombre.